Méndez, who will present on the empowerment of Black, Indigenous women of color through food systems in the US. So take it away, and my apologies, Hannah.
Thank you, Jocelyn. And I also want to ask that you keep in mind what you learned throughout Melissa's presentation, as ours really complement each other. So you'll be seeing that as well. So I conducted my case study on the empowerment of Black, Indigenous women of color through food systems in the US with the help of my academic advisor, Dr. Natasha Gordon-Chippenberry. So I approached my research through two questions, which were, how are Black, Indigenous women of color empowered through food production in the United States? And how does this empowerment inform the ways in which they fight food insecurity and improve well-being in marginalized communities? So I used two theoretical frameworks for my research, the first being Afro-Eco-Womanist framework, which highlights the necessity for a race, class, and gender intersectional analysis, and the Indigenous framework, which centers the politics of Indigenous identity and Indigenous cultural action. Methodology, I took extensive field notes remotely over the course of 3 months, and I also conducted 6 semi-structured interviews with female food growers. So in the literature, I found that when neoliberalism and food insecurity intersect with disempowerment, they create what's called horizontal oppression. So essentially, when women are marginalized via land dispossession, or they're not acknowledged or represented in food systems, they are oppressed, and therefore their communities, nutritional health, mental health are all affected, as well as the women's. So the 5 key themes that I came across in my research was that in working with food systems, women have a stronger cultural and ancestral connection. And through this, they find healing from ancestral and intergenerational trauma that comes attached to working with the land, specifically for Black and Indigenous women. And in this, they also want to share this healing with the community and organize the community to learn more about food systems and find this healing within themselves as well. And that transfers into education. So they really use these food spaces as a source of education for their communities to teach them more about growing food, being healthy, and mental health as well, and the importance of that. In working with food, women of color also use regenerative agricultural practices and holistic approaches to working with the land. So they don't use chemical fertilizers or anything that could be damaging to the land, because as they see it, the land needs healing as much as they do as individuals. And lastly, I found that in representation, these women of color, the main image of a farmer or a food grower they saw growing up was that of a white male. So they were really empowered in changing the face of food systems in the US through their food work and changing what this representation looks like for their communities. So finally, in my discussion, what I found is that in being empowered, women restore the earth, they regenerate the land, and they find a stronger attachment to their culture, to their ancestry, to their identity. And in strengthening their identity and this heritage, really, they improve the well-being for the community. They improve the representation. They find justice against these neoliberal food policies and these insecurities and oppressions, and find horizontal freedom, which is a term that I personally coined in my research out of horizontal oppression, to say that when women are empowered, communities are also empowered. So thank you so much. That is my email and my LinkedIn.
Oh my goodness, how lovely. Hannah, you've given us lots of generous space for questions. So if you have any questions for Hannah, please unmute right now and ask them. If anyone does, please do. Hannah, I just have one little question. I'm not seeing any here, but most of the women producers of food here you studied were working on a small scale, but I think you're talking about the implications are that if this were scaled or somehow brought in as a philosophy, so much would change for the better. And I was wondering if you could just talk about that for a little bit. What would you like to see? What's your vision?
So I definitely would love to see more connection of these grassroots organizations and grassroots work that these women are doing on a national scale. So that's kind of what I've been doing in approaching my senior thesis is comparing that to the Greenbelt movement in Kenya and looking at how they were able to nationalize their movement and using that as a model for the potential of what we could do with food systems and with women of color working with food systems in the United States. So I would love to see a more connection and network of these women really working together, because I did find that a lot of them could relate to each other through their experiences and through their work. So in not knowing each other, I think there is a barrier in the extent of what they can do through their work. But I think in making those connections, they can really implement change on a higher top level.
Okay, thank you again, Hannah.